All right. Well, thank you, all of you, for being here today and for continuing on this amazing path towards our 2024 grant selection process. Conversations, I think, for all of us who have done it before, is our favorite part. It is where it all comes to reality, and we finally get to meet the people who are doing their amazing work. And so it is just an incredible opportunity for all of us to learn and to grow and to connect in this process. And so I'm so glad that all of you are doing it. And I especially want to thank those of you who are doing several conversations. Really appreciate that. The timing was a little bit hard this year. This 2024 seems to be the spring of travel. And so there are several of you who are doing more than one. So thank you so much. We're going to start with our icebreaker, which is going to be in the Mentimeter again. Aviva is going to post the link. There it is. And the question is, what are you hoping to learn during the conversation phase? And so please click the link and enter words that come to mind in answer to that question. I love this. Barbara put in the chat, what is the context in which this work happens? I know that that is something that the Arts and Culture Group is really interested in exploring with all of our organizations. Passion, that is such a great word. And I think we will see that one in absolute detail. And there's another one, detail, drive, focus, how to best listen. I think one of the things that makes the conversation phase so special, I think, is really its emphasis on listening rather than site visits, where we seem to have an emphasis on our questions. I think we will learn from listening. And so I think this is a great opportunity for that. Another word is understand, we're seeing, connect. And again, I think this is a wonderful opportunity in this new form of conversation to make those connections with organizations. Identities of the org and their people. Yes, I think that it's a really wonderful thing to see who organizations bring to these conversations and really are able to add and give sort of life to their work by who is there. And by having those conversations, understand. These are all wonderful, and I'm just so excited to be at this phase. Aviva, anything else that you're seeing?
Oh, we just got some more.
Here we go. More are being loaded. And I think one of the things that we are all interested in is sort of this, especially as we are working with the smaller organizations, is this idea of their future and the vision, and also sustainability, understanding that we are part of the sustainability solution. So funders are as much responsible for sustainability as the organizations themselves. And so I think there is so much learning that we can do in this phase. And I'm just really pleased that all of you are going to be joining us for this. I think it's going to be amazing. So on that, I think, Aviva, I will kick it over to you to walk us through.
Excellent. Thank you all so much for sharing what you're hoping to learn. And all of that and more will definitely be a part of this phase of the work. So what I'm going to do now is take you through a bit of a training, and then we'll have time in your breakout groups to connect and prepare a little bit more. Before I dive in, though, I'm curious if anyone has participated in a conversation before, and if they'd be willing to come off mute and share what you liked about it and why you're back again. Yeah, Diane, go ahead.
Having done both in person and virtual, some wonderful things have happened virtually. The passion when it comes through is pretty amazing. And the other thing that's happened a couple of times, I think just once or twice, is that everything that we had thought about the organization, when it came to the conversation, didn't line up. So there have been some surprises in that regard as well. Not often, but you know, we came away from the conversation kind of scratching our heads and thinking, what happened? What was that? How did we come to a conclusion on based on our research and our discussions and what we found in writing that just felt and seemed so different from what the people that were on the conversation, that were involved in the conversation with us, that just totally shifted our perspective about that particular organization. So they're wonderful in many ways. Start where I ended, or end where I started.
Absolutely, Diane. And it's interesting, you can be surprised in both directions, right? And that's fascinating to see that unfold. Heidi, did I see your hand as well?
Sure. Yeah. I think the energy is really exciting. I think this is the most fun part of the process. I think that the interrelationships you see between the people that are part of the conversation is very insightful. And I note that Mona is on this call, and Mona is the woman who we interviewed last year. It'd be fun to hear her perspective on what it's like being on the other side, and maybe that would help us with our energy and insights and empathy and that kind of thing. But I think you learn a lot more just about how the whole organization works and how they work together, why it works. It's really a great experience.
Absolutely. And Heidi, you might be onto something. I did invite Mona here to share her perspective later today. So we're really happy to have you, Mona, and both as a member and as a grantee, and excited to hear more later on. Any other reflections about what it's like to participate in conversations before we dive in? Okay. Hearing none, I'm going to go ahead and share my screen again. Bear with me here. Okay, are you all seeing the presentation now? Excellent. Okay, so here you have a couple screenshots from some past conversations, but we're going to go ahead and move along and talk about how you might think it's just a name change, but it's not. It's really a shift in intention from site visits to conversations. And it's really an incredibly unique opportunity to learn more about our final 15 organizations who are all doing really incredible work. And that's, part of this whole process is limiting the burden on nonprofits. And that's why we're continuing to create more opportunities for connection and learning for our members and adapting the visits to be more conversational. So this is the third year of our newer grants process, and we're still learning, absolutely. If you've participated in past grant committees, again, you might say, oh, this is just the site visit, but it's really our opportunity to speak directly with organizations, and we're shifting that focus from judgment to support and infusing it through the whole process as part of our focus on trust-based philanthropy. So that doesn't mean our grant process is any less thorough or rigorous, or that we're learning less about these organizations. We're just doing it differently. And if it makes you slightly uncomfortable or concerned about doing a good job for the rest of the membership, know that your fellow members trust you. You've already selected, you've already selected 15 incredible organizations. So you really can't make a bad choice. And there also is no best choice. We are learning and growing together, and have great appreciation for you for leaning into this experience as a community. So just to kind of drive it all home here, site visits feel like a job interview. Conversations feel like a good date. And we learned this from Pia Infante at the Trust-Based Philanthropy Project when she did a training for our grantee engagement team. She said, you know what it feels like when you're on a good date. That's what we're looking for. Site visits are formal and have a consistent structure for every visit. Conversations are flexible and they really depend on organization preference, and that goes from everything to how they run the conversation, who's facilitating it, and how long the conversation will go. Site visits are focused on due diligence, and conversations prioritize both relationship building as well as learning. So what are our goals? Together, we'll conduct conversations with the 5 organizations selected by the research team and collectively decide on 2 to move forward to the ballot stage of the grant process. And our goals in this work are learning and relationship building. For learning, we're really hoping to gather information and impressions to share with the rest of the membership. Maybe there's some outstanding questions that you couldn't find answers to in the research phase. This is your chance to learn more. And we're also hoping to build relationships. So this is really this unique opportunity, as we keep saying, but it is unique, to meet individuals who are running the organization, whatever their role may be. And you are their guest, even virtually. They've likely spent a good amount of time preparing for your call. Even if we assure them this is a more relaxed conversation, we're trying to build relationships and connect, they're still going to be preparing and you might have some nerves. And they'll also be forming impressions about our membership based upon interactions with you. So this is really an opportunity for you to be an ambassador for Washington Women's Foundation out in the community. So the tone of the meeting, briefly related to the goals, we're trying to move away from going down our list of questions, check, 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 and towards a more generative, natural conversation. We'll still get our questions answered, but we hope it will feel less extractive for our nonprofit partners. A little bit on the logistics. So they're virtual visits. They've been very successful doing virtual visits for the past couple of years, and we're continuing that this year. It makes it easy to meet with organizations across the state and less burden on them to host us physically in person. The Zoom calls will be recorded and shared with the work group. I plan to upload them to Reviewer as fast as I can after Zoom finishes processing the recording itself, so that you can watch if you aren't participating and catch up for that final meeting. So I've taken into account conflict of interests, but if there's anything new that comes up, please do let me know. The schedule I shared out this morning, we did get a couple last updates, of course, as soon as I sent the email out, but that's okay. So I'll send that up. But if anything changes and you aren't able to attend last minute, let us know. We'll make it work. And you have the Zoom links in the calendar invites, as well as the document with all the links and the attendees for your ease. The teams are made up of 2 to 3 work group members and 1 person from the grants leadership team. So either Alyssa, Bobby, Catherine, or myself, or Catherine, our other team member here on staff, Catherine with a K, will be joining you to help guide the conversation, keep track of time, and take on the hosting duties of the Zoom call itself. And each team will visit 1 organization. Some of you, as Catherine mentioned, have agreed to take on more than 1 conversation. We thank you very much for your flexibility. So you might be on, 1, 2, or 3 teams, depending on how the schedule shook out this year. So before your conversation, we want you to become an expert on the organization as much as you can. So reread the LOI and the research materials, which are all on Reviewer. Read the research summary that the research group put together. There might be some potential questions from the work group as well. And think as you do all this research about any potential questions that come up for you that you would think would be helpful in the decision-making process, helpful for that decision-making process to find out. If you've read their materials already, fantastic. So take this additional read through as a chance to just sort of brush up, make sure you feel up to date on everything, and see if any new thoughts or questions come up. Also, before your conversation, you'll meet as a small team, either by phone or connect via email or Zoom, just to discuss and decide how you'd like to approach the conversation. Think about your goals, and in addition to any specific questions that might have come up from the research phase, you'll have access to a document we call our conversation starters. So those are some open-ended questions that will hope you will have on hand to help keep the conversation going. And so you might, as a group, look at those and identify maybe 2 or 3 that you would like to ask each specific organization. So keep in mind that you hopefully won't need too many questions to keep the conversation going. They might have questions for you as well. And the shorter a list of questions you have, the more likely you can keep it conversational, relationship focused, and less transactional. Try to balance who asks the question. So if you're working with your small team, you might identify, okay, this person really wants to ask this question, this person wants to ask that question, but also know that the conversation will flow and sometimes your question gets answered without you having to ask it, and then just note that and move along. You'll also want to talk through note-taking. So we'll record the meeting itself. So note-taking isn't as essential as it was when we were meeting in person and didn't have this recording. But if there's anyone who really likes taking notes, or that's helps them process as they're listening, then talk that through and see, how notes might help you with your deliverables later on. All right. Okay, so the timing from the for these conversations, we got some feedback in years past that we had hour-long visits that felt a little bit too rushed. So this year and last year as well, we asked organizations how long they'd like the conversation to be, ranging from 45 minutes to 90 minutes typically. And then we have a full range this year, again, just like last year. And those preferences for length have been incorporated into the final schedule that you have. For some of them, they said, we might not need the full 90 minutes, but let's block that time just in case we have it. So if it does wrap up early, feel free to thank them and end a little bit early. As I said before, your advisor will help keep time. You'll start with introductions, introduce yourselves, and get to know all the folks from the organization who are on the call, and then use those conversation starters to help keep things moving. Again, try to keep it conversational and less like a formal job interview. This will help relax the organization representatives and, be flexible, and remember that one of our goals really is creating that opportunity for an organization to share what they want to share. And just note that it might feel awkward in the first, 10, 20 minutes, and that's super normal. And it doesn't mean that you're doing something wrong or that you are putting them ill at ease. Just sort of work through it, and hopefully everyone will find a way to relax and get comfortable. All right, so at the conversation itself, really what you're getting is an enhanced picture of the quality of the leadership at the organization, whether they're paid or volunteer, whatever their role may be. And this can come through even if you don't talk about leadership explicitly. So keep an eye on the body language and interactions between the folks on the call. Some organizations will have board members present, some will have just staff. We don't dictate who they bring with them to the conversation. It's totally up to the organization for who they'd like to include. And if you do have a board member present, you can, kind of try to keep an eye out for how the board and the staff interact. Does it seem like they have a good relationship? Do they understand their respective roles? Are they on the same page with their vision? And if they don't have a board member there, remember, it's not required, and it can also be very difficult to manage logistically. Getting a board member in any place, even virtually, can be challenging. They're very busy folks usually, and it doesn't necessarily indicate that the board isn't supportive of the leadership. And instead, you could always ask questions about the board and the staff relationship directly. You also want to keep an eye out for this balance of competence and passion. So it's really an art, this balance, and we want to make sure an organization has enough dream to keep inspired, keep working towards that vision, and also enough competency to keep the lights on and the door open. We'll talk for a moment about asking questions. And we talked a little bit earlier about what it takes to be a good date. When you're a good date, you show up on time, you engage actively, and you work to build connection. The questions should really be used as conversation starters. We're trying to shift away from that list of questions on a clipboard that we run through and leave, and instead have that more natural conversation. When you're asking questions, ask with respect. Really try your best to communicate through your body language and the way you ask a question that we know they are the experts in their work. And the way we ask that question does have impact on the nonprofit representatives. We want them to have a good experience, feel comfortable to share information to help us with our decision making. And keep in mind that we know, nonprofit employer workers are understaffed, often working many jobs at once, and have limited resources as well. We talked a little bit about tone, but to come back to it again, tone is really key to getting the information that you want without making it feel extractive or like an inquisition. For example, you can always say, we're curious to know more about this, as a way to get into a topic that might be a little bit more sensitive. Open-ended questions help an organization to frame their answer in a way that works for them. So you'll still get the information that you might be looking for, but if you start it from an open-ended perspective, you have an opportunity for them to shape it and shape their answer in a way that really does tell the story that they want to tell. It also can be really welcoming to ask, either at the beginning or the end, if there are questions we're not asking that you think are important to answer, let us know. Or one of the conversation starters you'll see on that list is around what's important for you to bring back to the Washington Women's Foundation community. And just so you know, we have shared that list of conversation starters with the organizations as well, so they have some sense of what to expect. We don't want them to be too nervous going in blind, not knowing what we might ask about. All right. So there is an inherent power imbalance when we have conversations as a funder with a grant applicant, right? This is just part of being in a competitive grant process. And our job really is to keep the tone positive, respectful, professional, and friendly. Think about your facial reactions, your body language, even on Zoom, all of that does come through. And there's definitely ways to mitigate that power imbalance. We'll talk about that a little bit. The first is really around listening and learning. So avoid telling personal stories, help keep the conversation on track, be mindful of time, and avoid digressions. Also be aware of your biases. We've talked in previous phases about how biases really are these subconscious drivers that influence how we see the world. And we all have them. And sometimes they help us make efficient decisions, but sometimes they also blind us to new information. And we've discussed biases and how they impact our grant making at other trainings. We know when we're doing the LOI work, when we're looking at research, and conversations are no exception. As you did with LOIs and the research, try to be aware of the biases that might come up for you in a site visit. It might impact how you're able to take in the information that's being shared for you. For example, think about if you had a bad first impression, is it keeping you from evaluating other information that's shared? Or maybe you had just come from another conversation that went really well and you had a super positive impression. And is that impacting your ability to truly be open to a new conversation with a different organization? So I kind of wanted to open it up and see if there were any other ideas for how bias might show up in your conversations. Anyone want to share anything in the chat? Let's help each other through some of this. Feel free to come off mute and chime in. Yeah, Gwen, go ahead.
I remember a couple of years back, we were talking to the Western Washington University, and it was really interesting having sort of folks who were on staff and, faculty positions doing very sort of professional sort of presentation. And then you had students who were in the program and they were students, right? And so we had to really remember the sort of stage of life that each of the different people in that group were. And the sort of, I don't know, professionalism is the wrong word, but just the approach that they took to explaining, what the project was like was very, very different, and not, weighing those things differently, but really just taking it all in as they were explaining it.
Thank you, Gwen. That's a great specific example that I think illustrates what we're talking about really well. And Diane also added in the chat, sometimes it's hard not to show surprise with unexpected responses. Absolutely, we're human, right? These things happen. And you manage it, right? And you keep going and you try to keep the conversation flowing. Anyone else want to chime in on this? Totally fine if not, but don't want to cut
I,
anyone off.
I
Oh,
will.
go ahead.
I think it's
Barbara.
important to remember that the power imbalance is kind of the standard operating procedure for funding. And so we may be trying, striving to have a different kind of experience between grant maker and potential grantee. But the grantees are going to be looking for our biases, and they're going to be, they're going to be very aware of the power dynamic.
So true, Barbara. Thank you for sharing that. And something we can all be aware of, right? Like even as much as we're trying to shift this, that doesn't necessarily mean that these awesome organizations are going to be coming in with anything other than expecting the traditional power dynamic. Yeah, well put. Okay, well, I'm going to keep us moving here. This is rich stuff, and I'm sure you all have more to share, but please do help each other keep track of biases as they come up. If you notice something in yourself, share it with your teammates on your small team. And they might say, I was having that feeling too. And then we can, really build that learning together. I want to talk super briefly about cultural competency. So this is something we've learned from the Minnesota Council on Foundations. They talk about developing cultural competency by using a cultural lens. So a traditional lens really has a specific value placed on accurate research, super correct information, no typos, that kind of thing, a super clear alignment of the grantee with the foundation guidelines, and it may involve less transparent decision-making. In contrast, a cultural lens puts cultural identity at the center and allows for a more asset-based approach with an open-ended conversation between the foundation and the applicant. For example, it might mean valuing that an organization knows 2 languages over having an excellent grasp of the English language. And I want to be clear that applying this cultural lens is not a substitute for due diligence. It's simply a way to learn about an applicant in a community context and really evaluate requests in areas that are potentially harder to quantify. When you think about leadership, community organizing, youth development, that type of work, the measurements are different than other types of nonprofit work. Just like with your biases, help each other use your cultural lenses when you're preparing for and evaluating your conversations. All right. A couple common sense do's and don'ts we've borrowed from Social Justice Fund. Do be respectful of their time and help keep the meeting on schedule. Do invite everyone to relax. We can really be their advocates in this work and listen and learn. Do explain our grant making process and model if they have any questions about what comes next, or if you don't know, you can always suggest that they get in touch with me and I'm happy to walk them through. The don'ts, also very common sense. Don't suggest correct answers to questions. Don't directly or indirectly suggest that an organization's work is flawed in any way. Don't compare them to other groups, and for sure, don't interrupt, just like in a date. That is not what we're trying to do. And just from a grantee's perspective, I know we'll hear from Mona later on, but an organization might feel intimidated or disrespected during a conversation if they perceive us as quote unquote experts who've come to uncover what is quote unquote wrong with an organization and pass judgment on them. So everything we can do to mitigate that, we want to try. And as members, we might unconsciously use verbal or body language that conveys a sense of superiority. For example, using jargon, phrases like developing infrastructure or other sort of funding terminology, as opposed to saying, how you are building your organization's strength for the long term. Try to think about both how you show up physically and the words that you use as well. And then, just being mindful that the way we speak, as well as how we dress, the Zoom background, other factors could, in the eyes of organizations and members, represent privilege and wealth in a way that might feel alien or intimidating. And keep that in mind and just do your best to make the group feel comfortable during the conversation. All right. So we've gone through what happens before, what happens during the conversation. Now, a moment about what happens after. So you'll take an opportunity to gather as a small team and share your thoughts while they're still fresh. You can stay on the Zoom call if you'd like. Just remember to pause the recording, or you could find another time to connect as a small team to briefly start to think about what you've learned and what you would want to share with the work group. And it's really an opportunity to start to construct the 3 key learnings that you'll share at that final meeting. So you want to talk about what struck you, what surprised you, what are you impressed by? Talk through what you learned and try, if you can, to reach consensus on the team's collective opinions about what's most important to share moving forward. Of course, it's okay if you don't have consensus. Please feel free to represent that accurately as well to the work group. I also want to take a moment to talk about how what you learn during conversations will help you better understand potential opportunities to be bold. And I want to make a distinction between making bold decisions, which is one of our values as an organization, and risks that are not strategic. So being in leadership, is not inherently risky. It actually can be a really great time to invest in the organization and help them navigate what can be a tricky change management process. But on the other hand, if you find that there's a rotating cast of EDs and interims, that can indicate potential risk and that an organization isn't necessarily as healthy. New programming is also a very exciting time to support an organization, but if the new program seems to be off mission from the rest of the organization's work, that is something that's worth considering. And generally, if it's a young organization, new or lacking a track record, that is also an opportunity to be bold. New ideas, new energy can be great for a community, but if it becomes clear during the conversation that there's no plan or support in place, that could potentially be a risk. And as always, if you have a serious concern, something you've learned, get in touch with me right away and we can figure out the best way to navigate and move forward. All right. Why is this not moving forward? My slides are not cooperating. How fun. Let me try this. There we go. Okay, you're all seeing that, right? Okay. So what's next is the work group meeting. After all the conversations have been completed, you'll meet once with your work group to share what you've learned and together select 2 organizations to move forward to the ballot. In your update, accurate information is more important than advocacy, but honest enthusiasm is also okay. Again, if there isn't consensus, please do share that as well. Your work group can decide together how you want to address that. And we want to hear your real thoughts, but also don't want to necessarily sink an organization with one perspective. New this year, we've added an option to watch the recordings and participate in meetings for folks who aren't able to do a conversation, but still want to participate in this phase of the process. So that's part of why I want to get the recordings up as fast as I can so that you have time to watch all 5 conversations before our meetings on May 1st and May 3rd. And that's what happens at that last meeting. Let's see if my slides want to cooperate this time. It's always how it goes. All right, so your deliverables. You'll share 3 key learnings and write those up and share them with me by May 3rd, and as well as shared with your work group so that everyone has that to prepare for your final meeting. Focus again on those new things that you've learned. And then you'll also prepare feedback for the organizations that aren't moving forward to the ballot. You'll typically do that in your final meeting with your work group, and there's a little more time. So those are due May 10th. All right. So now we have time for your questions. And what I'll do, because my slideshow doesn't seem to be cooperating, is just stop my screen share so I can see you all. Thank you for your patience. Joyce, I see your hand.
Yeah, excuse me, I put it in the chat too. So we're supposed to send these 3 key learnings on to you. Are they just for the organizations that are moving forward to the ballot?
Yeah, great point of clarification on that I can offer. So I will include the 3 key learnings for the organizations that will be on the ballot in that voters pamphlet. So that will go out to the full membership to aid them in their learning about those 6 final organizations. I encourage you to still use the 3 key learnings as a framework for your final presentations on all 5 organizations, because that can be a helpful way to sort of focus the conversation in the presentation. I don't necessarily need you to submit those ones to me. The ones that I really need submitted are the ones that are going to go out in the voters pamphlet. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that's exactly what I wanted to know. So people don't have to do more work if they're not going to move forward.
For sure.
Thanks.
Diane, go ahead.
When are we going to hear from Mona?
Mona's coming up right after this.
Yay! Okay. I do have one question, which may be too specific, but I'm going to ask it anyway. So we have information about organizations that partner with each other. Is it a fair question to ask at some point? Tell us about your relationship with X, or how do you relate, or how do you partner with other organizations that deal with, similar populations?
Yeah, I think that's a fair question, especially since we, as we get more targeted in our priorities, we do see organizations talking about each other, working with each other, and that can really be a strength to have strong partnerships in place. And so absolutely, this is an opportunity to learn more about what those partnerships look like in practice.
Thank you.
Yeah. What other questions do you have? Okay, I think everyone's eager to hear from you, Mona. So I'll turn the Zoom mic over to you. Mona is the Executive Director of Communities of Rooted Brilliance, grantee with our early childhood education priority, and also a member of Washington Women's Foundation. And we're really excited to have her here today just to share a little bit about what it's like on the other side of the conversation. So Mona, I'll hand it to you.
Thank you, Viva. And thank you all for the opportunity to share. I asked Viva, like, do I need to prepare anything? And she's like, no, just share what your experience was. So, our organization is pretty small, although our early learning program has been in existence for over 10 years. So we feel like, we know what we're doing. And when we were applying to Washington Women's Foundation, we know it's going to be a competitive process because of the way the grant works. Is like the LOI in different phases. And we've participated in different grants like Social Venture Partners. And we were always in the last 2, and then we never really get to the last one. So we were like, okay, let's just try for an experience with Washington Women's Foundation. And every phase of the process, if I recall correctly, we were pleasantly surprised with the process. And we're, part of the work that we do is, we do write grants, and that's like we're mainly grant funded organization, but we want funders to know about what we do and what's important for us. So that's kind of like always been the main driving theme. And it's really hard to articulate everything you want to share in a kind of scripted grant questions and space limitations and things like that when you write grants. So one thing is we write all our grants, so we kind of know what goes on the paper. So, but not many other small community-based organizations have grant writing skills. So that's something I would say to take it into consideration. Some maybe, someone mentioned that they were very surprised because a grant writer may not be part of the conversation. It could be a contracted grant writer. So that's something that you may want to take into consideration. We knew everything we wrote, so for us, it was easier to share. The conversation part, I think, was the most fun. Every part was fun, submitting questions and and we documents ahead of time. So we were like, oh, that's it. Like, we don't have to do anything. And you did all the work while we're just wait for the next phase, which was like so respectful of our time instead of like crafting a really elaborate application that has to outdo the LOI, because this is a final, which is less stress for us. But the conversation itself was like the questions, getting the questions ahead of time was really fun. And all the questions we thought were open-ended. So we're like, oh, so that means that there is no right or wrong answer. Like what we feel is good. So our program manager and I kind of discussed a little bit of like the major themes that we may want to answer just to be more prepared. Like, will you take this question? I'll take this question. But we didn't really script what we wanted to answer because we wanted to be as organic as possible. And we invited our board chair, but he didn't get the question. So he just showed up and we're like, we'll let you know, Josh, when we want you to answer a question. So he was just an observer. We invited the field community. So it's like one recipient of our services and a family who's getting our early learning services, and the person who does the work, a home visitor. So we wanted it to be their words and the way they see the program instead of myself and the program manager's work. So for us, it's because they are the essence of the real work, right? Like we just supervise and find funding and take care of the administrative issues, but they know the work and they tell us what's valuable to them. So we thought the funders might want to hear their perspective of those receiving services. And I think ability to share our philosophy itself in doing this nonprofit, that was really a rare opportunity because no grant questions come with like, what's the driving force behind the work that you do? So, I mean, it's been about a year, so those are as much as I could recall for the experience of the conversations. But I mean, I felt like it was just getting to know people and sharing what we're doing. I never felt like it was okay, it has to be the right answer, something. So we chose the 90 minutes because we know we tend to be more verbose when it comes to work, explaining what we do because we love what we do. But I don't think we even took all the 90 minutes, but yeah, so that's kind of like what I recall. You may have specific
Mona.
questions for me.
Yes, please. What questions do you have for Mona? Go ahead, Anne. Let's see, you are on mute.
Mona, hello.
Hi.
I wanted to ask you if you had any things that made you uncomfortable with the conversation, any feedback for us on anything that you would have had been different.
I don't think there was anything that was uncomfortable at all. I was a little worried about our staff, the home visitor and the parent itself. Like, I didn't want them to feel like, the funding is dependent on them answering the right question. So I kind of talked to the home visitor and told her to talk to the parent that, just if they don't like something about our program too, it's okay to share. So I think, yeah, but I was happy with the way they describe, like they take ownership of the work they do, which is what we love about working with them. So I mean that's kind of like what I recall, but I don't think there's anything unkind. It was very pleasant. It was really fun for us. And we even told Aviva whether we get the grant or not, like we're just so excited to be able to experience this grant process because ultimately we want people to know why we do what we do. You know, it's always nice to be funded, but you know, we think that the process itself is like very respectful of our time and you know, curious as to what we do. So that was really, really good.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mona, and thanks for the great question, Anne.
Mm.
Any other questions? Yeah, Catherine.
I just want to add, I mean, I was part of that conversation, and one of the things I remember very clearly writing in my notes is that, Mona, you did not talk again after the first introduction for the first like 45 minutes or an hour. There was so much respect and time given to your team, and no feeling at all that you had any sense of needing to step in and add or amend. And it was a beautiful, beautiful relationship that we could see just play out before our very eyes. So it was a gift to be part of that conversation, I have to say. So I'm just going to add that it was amazing.
Oh, thank you for that. And it's you know, because of the work they do, because I lean on them, right, in terms of bringing the best, that the culturally appropriate way to do early learning. You know, we co-develop the curricula with the cultural community leaders, so it will be I'm not the expert, they are the experts. So when it comes to the organization work and like budgets and things, that of course I can answer those questions, but when it comes to like delivering culturally appropriate way and respecting the parents and the children, it's I don't think there was anything that I could add to make it better. Yeah.
Thank you so much. Sarah, go ahead.
Okay, there we go. Mona, this is super helpful. I'm really new to the foundation, and this is really helping me get a picture of what it's like to be in the conversation. And I'm new to trust-based philanthropy as well. And so I'm curious for you coming into this process, you know, you talked about the letter of interest and then not having to follow up with a really detailed form. I'm curious at what point you started to feel that relationship that I'm understanding to be so foundational to trust-based philanthropy, you know, like at what point did that feel like that was really starting to kick in? Was it before the conversation or in the conversation, as part one of the question? And part two is, because I don't know at what point potential grantees are really getting to interact with the foundation to start to build that relationship. Is there anything the foundation, the members could have done prior to the conversation that they didn't do that would start to build that relationship and that comfort coming into the conversation more or differently?
Yeah. I mean, there are things that I would, I mean, I don't know if I shared previously. I must have, but I'm not trained in nonprofit, so I come in with different lens of doing this work. So one thing I notice is it's very the structures are put in place of like separating like funders and grantees, right? It's always been like a very invisible process that you write something and you send it off and then you just get a letter saying, sorry, you don't get it, or here you got it, right? But I've always wished for more involvement of funders to the work that the communities do. Because there are organizations that do probably better work than we do, but they may be intimidated to apply for funding, or they hear that it's a very selective process. But I think the more engaged funders are with the community, regardless of them applying or not, I think you can make better decisions. For me, the process is like, Aviva's email saying like, whatever you have, just send it. It's okay. It doesn't have to be anything polished or final. And so we just send in whatever we think might be helpful to see our work in different perspectives, right? But that is not how typical like grant applications work. So for us, it's really fun, right? Like to even try that out. And then, so the result is not that much of a priority than like navigating this process. So prior to the conversation, we were already feeling comfortable with Aviva's like saying, oh, like these are awesome, because I was like worried about sending too much. Is it too much or too? And I intend to send too much, but too many documents going through the email. But we were already feeling like being like cared for, right? Like not to do something, prepare something extra that you don't already have. So I remember that vividly. And then the conversation was just like meeting someone new and chatting, like first date, like Viva said, like who are you and what do you like, kind of thing, right? So that was very pleasant. I think, being engaged with the communities that will help the, funders probably be more comfortable asking questions and not be too worried about, like, am I offensive or am I using the power dynamic? So I think that's the only thing I would recommend. Like the more opportunities you get to immerse yourself in communities, attending community events and just seeing who's doing what. And, we love to do cultural events, and, so just enjoying their food and festivities. And so that's what I would recommend, like really, and then will make you feel more connected to the work, I think, like we do, we love that with our communities that we serve.
Thank you so much for those reflections, Mona, and for the great questions, Sarah. Even if you're not new, we still are working through all of that, so we're with you. Okay. Any last burning questions for Mona before we move on? We've learned so much from you, Mona.
Mona, this is Susan.
Go ahead.
I was wondering whether you were surprised or intrigued, or I'm not sure what the best word would be, of anything you heard today. Did something?
No, not really. I've attended some of Aviva's training, so I'm not surprised. I mean, I don't think there's anything surprising, but I'm really grateful for all the care that you take on to really respect, folks who are applying for grants. So that's a lot of work on your part already, right? So I'm grateful for that. I think we should advertise more, like what Washington Women's Foundation. So other funders will, probably all of you are familiar with CCF, community-centric fundraising, and the philosophies behind it. If you're not, those are really good podcasts to listen to. And I really love their suggestions, from funders' point of view as well as grantees' point of view. But yeah, I think it's really nice to know that you care about people who are doing the work, and I wish there are more funders like you, honestly, to do this work.
Thank you.
You so much, Mona. Please join me in sharing your appreciation for Mona in the chat and clapping. Thank you.
Thank you, Mona.
You'll help us be the best conversationalists we can be. And before I move us into the final breakout room section of our time today, I wanted to just check in with Catherine, see if there's any last words from Catherine about any of this, any part of the member perspective, or anything we might have missed.
No, I think that I hope that you all have great conversations. And I think the only thing I would caution is, don't come in with a long list. I think a long list of questions gets in the way of it becoming a conversation. And I know that one of the things we've learned is that it's very helpful to have all the organizations answer one or two of the same questions to sort of even the playing field. But I think we just need to make sure not to hamstring ourselves by having too long of a list, because it is a wonderful opportunity. And the most important thing is to listen and not trying to be anticipating when you're going to be able to jump in with the next thought. So it's such a great moment of learning for us all, I think. So thank you again to everyone for doing this. And Mona, thank you so much for being here and sharing your thoughts. It was absolutely a joy last year. So that's it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Is
Joyce,
it okay if I can be excused because I have a 1 o'clock?
Yes,
due?
absolutely.
Yeah.
Thank you, Mona. Take care.
Bye-bye.
Joyce, did you have one more
Yeah.
question for us?
So when Catherine was talking about questions for each organizations, or to ask the same questions, one thing I took away from our last discussion with Aviva was to think about what we need to know about each organization in order to achieve our desired outcome. Like we're going to talk about this in our small group in a few minutes, but it might be like, do we want to really talk about what each organization does? What do we want to know? Do we want to know more about your mental health component? Do we want to know more about your housing component? But what is it that we need from each organization in order to help us to make our end decision? Because a lot of the questions that came up during research are the same questions. I'm not really sure how much housing they do. Is it enough? I'm not really sure how much mental health they do. Is it enough? So rather than asking each organization like the same questions, more figuring out for our group, what do we need to know in general from all of 5 organizations to help us make our decision moving forward is a good way to look at a conversation. And then the conversation guides you to that goal rather than X question for every organization. So just as food for thought.
I love that framing, Joyce, and really that's what we're heading towards as a collective, is making these decisions. And sometimes you need different pieces of information to make those decisions.
Yeah, you said that before.
No, you said it really well.
I got it from you, but good.
Great. Okay. Any questions process-wise before I open up your breakout rooms and give you time to connect and get prepped? No. Okay. I'm going to go ahead and open the rooms. Enjoy your time connecting with each other.